Hanson, engage.
I have to answer that question.
I'll answer the question. You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Give us some men who know the truth. And who will declare the truth. And who will stand with Athanasius and Polycarp and Calvin and Luther and Whitefield and Edwards, and who will declare from the housetops that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation.
Welcome to the Engaged Truth Show. I'm Caleb Harrelson, your host today, and I'm so excited about today's episode. I have joining me my co-host and friend, Danny Cooper. It's good to have you, Danny. How are you doing today, brother?
Hey, pretty good, man.
Awesome. Well, I'm real excited about this episode, and it is the season to be discussing Christmas, and so I've been trying to grow my Christmas beard. I don't know if that's a thing, but I'm going to say that is now, I guess. And got some green on. Now, the topic we're going to be covering today is people just lose their mind in social media world when it comes to Christmas and celebrating it. And is it pagan? Now, this is a topic that spans all the way from Christians on varying degrees of the spectrum of belief of holiday celebration, and all the way even to Jehovah's Witness. Isn't that right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, they are really anti-holiday altogether, but especially Christmas. They
Right.
They don't believe in celebrating birthdays, and so when you add the fact that Christmas is supposed to be, in recognition of Jesus' birthday, they get all tied up in knots over this kind of thing.
Yeah, and we're gonna unpack that some more in a little bit. For those who don't know, Danny is a former Jehovah's Witness, now a born again believer in Jesus, and in a solid biblical church. And the big pushback on this is that, oh, Christmas is pagan, and Christians, don't you know that Christmas is rooted in pagan practices? And part of that really comes down to these claims that, well, maybe Christians really just borrowed from it, and it's not even really original. And I'm so excited about the guest that we have today to unpack a lot of these questions. We have my friend who is a former guest on the show and has an excellent ministry called Christian Answers for the New Age. We're going to go ahead and bring her on, Marcia Montenegro. It's good to have you, Marcia. How are you doing today?
Hi, Caleb and Danny. It's great to be on with you today. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Well, we're so excited to have you. And for some of our viewers, this may be the first time that they're catching you. So maybe you can just tell them a little bit about yourself and your testimony and your ministry.
Okay, sure. I'm a former New Ager. I was in it for at least 20 years and very, very deeply involved in it. I was a professional practicing astrologer for a big chunk of that time. And then the Lord intervened in my life. And I mean, he really intervened because I wasn't trying to, I wasn't seeking a way to leave the New Age, or I wasn't considering Christianity or anything. He just intervened in my life, and I encountered the true Jesus Christ and put my trust in him. And so I was born again, became a Christian. And a few years later, the Lord started giving me opportunities to speak and share my testimony and talk about the New Age. And that eventually led to a full-time ministry. So it's Christian Answers for the New Age. And I've been doing that full-time for 22 years.
Wow, that's awesome. And for those who want to hear more of your story, I know you've done videos just on that because there's so much to it. And it's amazing hearing just the way God has brought you to where you were, to where you are now. But really a great miracle story itself is any person that is converted and gives their life to the Lord. That is an amazing story and miracle. Mm-hmm. So no one has a boring story. I like to say to anyone listening,
right?
If you've come to the Lord, you came from an enemy of God to a friend of God through faith in Christ. So I love following your page, Christian Answers for the New Age, and reading articles. And I just sent another article to a friend, and I'm amazed at how much you write on there, and particularly this time of year. You're always focused on one issue. What is that issue that always comes up?
It's Christmas. It's Christmas, yeah. And there's so much surrounding it. Aside from, and maybe related to what we're talking about today, Christmas and the pagan origins controversy issue. Mm-hmm. Then there's the Magi question, and the Magi were astrologers. So that brings up issues. I used to be an astrologer. So that's an issue I've addressed and done posts on. And then there's the whole thing, and of course, the Star of Bethlehem is part of that. And then there's the whole thing about Jesus and there's the virgin birth. I haven't posted on that. I did post today 2 talks by my friend, Dr. Lydia McGrew, on the virgin birth and how the evidence for it is there in the text. It's very interesting. But there's just a lot of stuff surrounding Christmas, and it brings up all kinds of issues and questions. And so it ends up being, December actually ends up being like a really busy month for me, which I never anticipated initially, but it started several years ago and it just has stayed that way. Is Caleb around?
Where did Caleb go?
I don't see him. I don't know. He disappeared. Our host is
okay.
Missing in action.
One of the things I was going to ask is about the December 25th day, because when I was a Jehovah's Witness, they would always say, well, since Jesus wasn't really born on that day anyway, then why would you want to celebrate Christmas on that day since it's not his birthday?
Right. And that is really probably one of the biggest issues of Christmas. And I have been reading a lot of articles on it over the last several years. And what's interesting and what I've learned is that, notice in Luke 1, I think it's verse 5, it says that let me just read that. In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Now, this Zechariah that I'm speaking of course, is the father of John the Baptist. And it specifically states that he was in this division of Abijah. Now, this goes back to when the Levites were divided up into groups so they could be scheduled for times for their service in the temple. And there are early documents showing that that time was in late September for him. And that led early Christians to conclude that then around, they put the date around September 25th. And then March 25th would have been when Elizabeth met up with Mary, and John the Baptist in Elizabeth's womb leaped with joy, recognizing the Messiah in the womb of Mary. And then that would give 6 months later, 9 months later, the date of December 25th. So there's a calculation there. It wasn't, I don't think it was meant to be exact, but one of the things the early Christians did was they did try to come up with dates using this kind of and different methods. And so that was confirmed apparently by the Dead Sea Scrolls, where there's manuscripts and some documents were found where the date of December 25th was calculated that way based on the service of Zechariah in the temple. So what I say is, first of all, that does away with all of the accusations that December 25th replaced a pagan holiday, because that isn't at all how they figured it. Plus, there was no big pagan holiday on December 25th at the time Jesus was born. And when those first Christians were recognizing December 25th as the time of Jesus' birth, that was around 202 AD. Okay. And the first real pagan holiday on December 25th was around 274 AD. And actually, that was just the beginning of it. It actually, it was more later that it was celebrated. And it's believed that was done actually to try to quash Christianity. It was an
celebration?
It was the Sol Invictus.
Oh, okay, yeah, the birth of the unconquerable sun.
Yeah, and it was done to try to quash Christianity. So it was an anti-Christian move. So in fact, it's reverse. It's not the Christians imitating the pagans. It's the pagans maybe not imitating the Christians, but trying to supplant the Christian date. And Saturnalia, in case people are thinking and wondering about that was celebrated December 17th through the 23rd.
Yeah.
And so there's just no connection to some kind of pagan feast or pagan holiday. Now, I also want to make the point that even if there had been a pagan feast on December 25th, let's say there was a pagan feast when Jesus was born on December 25th, even if that's true, it would not be wrong to celebrate Christmas, because what matters is who are you honoring on that day, And if you're going to honor a pagan god, well, then that's pagan. But if you're going to honor Jesus Christ, that is Christian. But that's not the case.
Yeah, are you going to not celebrate someone's birthday who happens to fall on the same birthday as Hitler just because that was Hitler's birthday?
Yeah, exactly. My birthday's on Halloween. A lot of Christians think that's an evil day, but that's my birthday. It's my son's birthday. A date and a day can't be evil. And in fact, on Halloween, when I was posting on that, and I was on a couple of programs about Halloween, one of the things I say is that verse from it's the Psalms, I think, this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Every day is a gift from the Lord, and a day and a date can't be evil.
Yeah, it's kind of like how my wedding anniversary is 9/11.
Oh,
wow.
wow.
It's like, are we not going to go out and celebrate our anniversary because it's 9/11?
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
so it's,
Yeah.
you know,
Exactly.
you got to have some
Yeah.
really deep rabbit holes with that.
Yeah, and I know some of it, people say, well, if it's not prescribed in Scripture, then you shouldn't do it. But then I recently saw it pointed out that Jesus celebrated the Feast of Dedication of of Lights of Hanukkah in John 10, but that wasn't prescribed. That whole event happened in between the Old and New Testament, and so that's an interesting point. You'd say
That's true.
Jesus had the perfect opportunity. I heard Mike Winger say this recently, where he said, he could have said, this is not something you should celebrate, but he didn't do that. Jesus was celebrating the Feast of Lights. And
exactly. That's a very good point, Caleb. And actually, someone mentioned that to me maybe last year or the year before around Christmas, and I had completely forgotten that. So thank you for bringing that up, because I've had a few people comment on my Facebook post, well, that's not prescribed. We're not told to do that. And I've completely forgotten about the Hanukkah thing. So I'm going to go back and insert an answer.
Yeah, I do think it is helpful, of course.
And say, hey, wait a minute, let's think about this, because Jesus observed Hanukkah. Yeah, and also to say that you can't do it because it's not prescribed, it's kind of an argument from silence.
Right.
I mean, just because, God didn't say, all right, you must observe, the birth of Jesus, it doesn't mean that if you do it, it's wrong. It's wrong if God says don't do something and you do it. Right. That's wrong, but it's not wrong the other way around. So this idea that it has to be prescribed, I mean, frankly, I think it's kind of silly. I know there are people who have that view, and okay, that's their view. If they really feel strongly about it and they don't want to observe Christmas, that's fine. And in fact, I want to make it clear that I am not saying people should observe Christmas. I am not saying that. If you don't want to, some people don't want to because they see it as very materialistic and they think it's just observed in an irreligious way, and that bothers them. And if that bothers them, then that's their choice. But what I do say is, if you choose not to observe it, at least base it on the truth. Don't base it on a lot of falsehoods. So my main point is to point out the falsehoods and not buy into them. That's my main thing. And then what people choose to do with that is, that's their decision.
Yeah, and don't condemn people that choose to do it.
Yeah, don't condemn people that choose to do it. And that's another thing. We've got to. There's liberty there in Christ. It's not an issue where somebody's sinning. So we need to give liberty, and give liberty to those whose conscience are bothered. But I do want people to have the facts. I hate to see people believing falsehoods. And, it really, really bothers me deeply.
Right. And, there's several scriptures in the New Testament where Paul's talking about each day that it's kind of a conscience issue. And if it's something's not done out of faith, then okay. And then, of course, he has a lot of particular issues that he deals with, like, if this meat is sacrificed to idols, if the person says it's sacrificed to idols, then abstain. In some of those different scenarios, but he says, hey, the meat itself is neutral. And then I think comes into a lot of the issues of, really, okay, is the origin of something, could it be, even if it was pagan, which it's not, it could be resituated for a purpose to celebrate Jesus. It still doesn't mean Jesus is not historical. So you have that issue as well. But then, we'll get into the trees in a little bit. But I always see this meme going around by at least a few friends, maybe, hopefully they're watching, where they say something like these different pagan, quote unquote, deities that were allegedly born on December 25th. And that's supposed to show the Christians just stole from that. Which it's kind of a bizarre argument to me, because there's a massive amount of historical evidence that Jesus existed, from early testimony, eyewitness testimony, archaeological evidence. We have extra biblical authors, Tacitus, Pliny, Josephus, all affirming the existence of Jesus. And so you're going to say that right there is why you're going to say this ridiculous straw man. But I think even on that issue of Mithra, Horus, and Dionysus, have you heard that they were allegedly born on December 25th?
Oh yeah. There's a whole slew of them that supposedly were born on December 25th, and they had 12 disciples, and they were born of a virgin. And actually, here's the bottom line: people should know there is zero historical documents that make these claims about any of these gods. This is just completely fabricated out of whole cloth. There is not a single historical fact or document that backs that up. So if somebody says, well, hey, Mithra had 12 disciples and he was born of a virgin, then I would say, please provide me with a link that shows the historical document that states that, because they can't. All they can do is go to a website that's making the claim.
Yeah, or Zeitgeist.
These are called, the people who make these claims are usually called the Jesus mythicists, I think. And there's a lot of refutation online from Christians. And there's a whole series of YouTube videos that I found and I posted maybe a couple of Christmases ago. There's this one guy who takes them on one by one. He does all of those pagan gods. There's like 10 of them, 12 of them. He does Tammuz. He does, Mithra. He does, my mind's blank. Give me some others, Mithra, Tammuz.
Horus.
Yeah, I mean, all the pagan gods that are being claimed where these claims are made that Jesus is a copycat. It's a copycat savior myth is kind of what it's called. But anyway, yeah, you just go on YouTube. Those series of videos are always like Jesus versus Mithra, Jesus versus Tammuz, and the videos are very brief, and he just gives the facts out, and you just get the information very quickly. You don't have to sit there and listen to an hour lecture. He's very, very short and sweet. And there's some other people that have similar. And then there's the very famous one that I've seen for years from Lutheran satire about Horus. And it's an animation with the pastor, and Horus comes into the church and says, and he says, and he starts making all these false claims, and the pastor knows all of the information and just gives it all back to him. But it's done. Lutheran satire does funny.
Oh yeah, I like
animated videos, and a lot of people have seen that, I think, because I see it all the time.
Yeah. No, those are good resources, and I just hope that these ideas will be put to rest, because like when I heard that, Mithra was emerged out of a rock. Okay, well, you can't really even call that a virgin birth or any equivalent. I'm like, really? This is the best you got?
I know. And they're mythological characters. There's no historical evidence for these. These are pagan gods that by definition they're mythological. And then people can say, well, even if they're myth, that's where his disciples got this information. No, it's just not there. Plus, the cult of Mithra did not really emerge fully, I think, until the 2nd or 3rd centuries. Mm-hmm. It wasn't even the whole thing about Mithra came after Jesus. So, it's just totally baseless to make those kind of claims.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even the connecting all the way to like a supposed resurrection parallel, it still doesn't work, because really they have some like immaterial, non-bodily existence. So it's completely unparalleled in history, the bodily resurrection of Jesus itself, that there's nothing that was stolen from pagans. If anything, you're saying some of them probably stole from Christianity later, like Mithra became popular later. So you mentioned some of your astrology background earlier, and this connection that people try to make with zodiac signs. Maybe you can even explain, like, what is a zodiac for those who don't know?
Oh, okay, yeah.
And what is astrology?
There's a whole lot about that. The zodiac signs are the names of 12 constellations: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, etc., all the way up through Pisces. That's used in astrology. Now, it's used in astronomy mainly just to give the planet or the star's location. So, the sun is located now in Sagittarius. Okay. And maybe Venus is in, who knows, maybe it's in Scorpio or Sagittarius. So that gives a location from the Earth's viewpoint of where a heavenly body is situated. But in astrology, of course, all of this has meaning. All the planets have meaning. The zodiac has meaning. Their location has meaning. Their relationship to each other has meaning. So all of that is supposedly means something. Now, what did you want me to say in regard to this? Because what I'm thinking of is how some people try to connect this to the birth story and make Virgo mother, try to make Virgo Mary. But I don't think that's what you were thinking of.
Oh, well, I know you did a post on that on your page recently. The great
that's about the conjunction.
Okay. Yeah.
The other thing is false too, because that's just not. There's no biblical evidence for that, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but I won't go into that. I've done posts on that too. Yeah, the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn is going to be on December 21st. They're going to be, from Earth's viewpoint, very, very close together, like, less than a degree apart, which is about as close as you can get. Now, in astrology, a conjunction is basically the two planets, their energies are combining, and that can be problematic or it can be a good thing, depends on which two planets are involved. In this case, it's supposed to be, in traditional astrology, kind of fortuitous, because Jupiter is a planet of, in astrology, sort of a planet of good fortune. Saturn, though, is a planet of limits and limitations, because until Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were discovered, way later, like Uranus was discovered in the 18th century, Neptune was discovered in the 19th century, and Pluto wasn't discovered till the 20th century. So until, 1789 or something, the only planets they knew about went up to Saturn. And so since Saturn was the furthest planet they could visibly see, that was the limit. So it became the planet of limitations in astrology. But Jupiter and Saturn together are supposed to be fortuitous because Jupiter is expansive. So anyway, so a lot of people, there's a lot of articles online. I Googled it the other day, and oh my goodness, there's like a million things about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction.
For sure.
I mean, some of them are just astronomical, where they're explaining it and they're saying it is going to make a bright light right before sunset, I think in the western or southwestern sky. I can't remember now. And so if you can see it at that time, then it would be an interesting light to see, but then it's going to fade. So astronomically, it's interesting. Astrologically, now people are saying different things. Of course, astrologers are saying one thing, New Agers are saying another. They're trying to give it a meaning because it's going to be in the sign of Aquarius. Right. And so astrologers and New Agers who are into the idea of the age of Aquarius are giving it more meaning because it's happening in the sign of Aquarius. So and as a former astrologer, I totally get that, because I know if I was still an astrologer, I know what I would be thinking. So I know why they see it as intent. But then I've also seen some posts from Christians about this could be the star that was the Star of Bethlehem. So,
okay.
First of all, of course, there's no meaning behind Jupiter and Saturn making a conjunction. It has no meaning at all. It's beyond the fact that they're making a conjunction. And it makes it a pretty light in the sky. So beyond that, there's no meaning. As far as the Star of Bethlehem goes, first of all, this conjunction happens every 20 years. So now it's not always that close. The fact that they're being so close is what makes it a big deal, but they're not actually close. Here's the thing. It's only from our viewpoint on Earth. They're actually still something like, I put it in my post because I quoted an article. They're like hundreds of millions of miles apart, or I forgot how they're really far apart.
Yeah. In reality, they're far apart. Yeah.
It's like so far apart. I can't remember the number. So, I mean, it's not like Jupiter and Saturn are like right up there, like side by side, It's like it would be a very long trip to go from Jupiter to Saturn. So they're actually not close together. So even to say that this conjunction means something is silly when they're actually still really far apart. Now, but then again, it happens every 20 years. It's only for a short time. It doesn't last a real long time. And we know the Magi apparently followed the star for probably about 2 years.
Yeah.
And then what did it do after they went and saw Herod and heard the prophecy of the king being born in Bethlehem? When they go to Bethlehem, the star stands over the house or the dwelling place of Jesus. You just can't, no planet or star can do that. Just can't do it. So I share the view of many others that this was a supernatural light. What the Magi saw, I don't know how God did that. I don't know, because he doesn't tell us. But, because they were astrologers and they did notice unusual things in the sky. And for whatever reason, they believed this star would lead them to a king. They followed it. And God used that to lead them to Jesus. And then when they saw Jesus, they worshiped him. And they became the first recorded worshipers of Jesus, which is incredible because they were pagans. But then Matthew, one of the themes of Matthew is that the gospel will go to the Gentiles.
Right. So
you have that at the very beginning in the birth narrative of Jesus. He's worshipped by pagans. I think that is just so cool. Because you've got, this theme running in Matthew, and later where Jesus is telling the disciples in Matthew 28, go to Jerusalem and Judea and out into the world and make disciples. So here the gospel is going to go way out, but God brought some pagans to the gospel, so to speak, when he had the Magi come and see Jesus and they worshiped him. So I think that is I think that Matthew 2 narrative is one of the coolest narratives in the Bible. I mean, I just love it. And as a former astrologer, I really, really appreciate it because it shows God using astrologers, but he doesn't use astrology. That wasn't astrology. That you don't following a star is not astrology. So, it's not, he didn't use, there's no astrological reason that there would be something like that. And I do want to let people know, when I was an astrologer, one of the things astrologers did was try to figure out the birth chart for Jesus. This was a consuming interest of many astrologers. And they would come up with all kinds of charts because they believed he ushered in the age of Pisces. They would often try to make him a Pisces or have Pisces in his chart.
What's the age of Pisces?
The age of Pisces is actually and this is an astronomical thing where the North Pole points towards a certain constellation. And because of of something called it's a shift in the North Pole every 2,000 years, it moves. So it moves through the zodiac backwards every 2,000 years. So actually around the time of Christ, it was pointing towards Pisces. And now it's moved into Aquarius, or it's moving into Aquarius. So there are these ages that are 2,000 years long. Now astrologers give a meaning to it. So they believe that Jesus ushered in the age of Pisces, and Pisces is the sign of a fish, and Jesus had fishermen disciples.
Oh, okay.
Then they connect all the fish stories to Pisces, and other things that you're really just random coincidences, but they give it meaning. Pisces is a sign of universal love and martyrdom. So you can see how they're going to fit Jesus into that. I actually have an article on my website called The Piscean Jesus. If you want to read about that and hear and see how I respond to what they say, that actually was a paper I wrote in seminary for a class. And it's kind of a long article, but with a lot of footnotes because it was a seminary paper.
Yeah,
but
sure.
it is. I really go into it and I show how that doesn't really line up. How Jesus is not connected to Pisces. So anyway, so they believe that I can't remember what I was doing. I got way off. I got way off onto the whole thing about Jesus' Piscean avatar. So anyway, why was I saying that?
Yeah, I think we were just talking about just what their views are on
Oh,
how
you
they
asked me what
interpret
Pisces was.
Yeah, yeah.
You asked me what Pisces was because,
Right.
but I can't remember why you asked me that.
Well, we were talking about the Magi and how they tried to have a birth chart for Jesus too,
Oh,
or the astrologers
I'm
tried
sorry.
to.
I totally forgot. Thank you for reminding me. This happens to me all the time.
No, you're good.
I'm sorry. So yeah, so they were trying to put Pisces in his chart because of that. But people were coming up with all kinds of different charts for Jesus. That was just, I remember one meeting of the Astrological Society where we were all sitting there doing that and discussing it. And I was doing it too. And different people would say, oh yeah, that chart looks really good. I think that's a possibility. So, trying to determine this date for Jesus in astrology was a passion for some astrologers.
What do they base their calculations off of?
Well, they base it on trying to a more or less the approximate time that historians and others give to the time Jesus was born. And we don't know what year he was born, right? But there's speculation about certain years. We know we have a window, and then there's a speculation, and I forgot exactly what it is. It's something like 4 BC or 7 BC to
I've heard 4
480
BC
or something. Yeah. So they'll choose a time in there, and then they'll do it based on what they think the qualities of Jesus, of his life were. So the Piscean thing will be there, and they'll pick a date or a time, and they'll do a chart for that. And or they'll just put down what they think it could have been, and then they'll see if that matches up with a time. It's a lot. There's a lot of kind of mathematical calculation, but most of it is the astrological beliefs in what a chart stands for. So if you think Pisces is going to be prominent in his chart, you might want to pick him as being. Well, we know he's probably born at night, because it was nighttime, I think, when the shepherds were in the field and the angels appeared. Wasn't it nighttime? I think so.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So we know, so that limits that time of day. So you can do charts and you would limit it to the certain time. It wouldn't be any time, 24-hour time. So that would help come up with a chart. And then you would maybe think, okay, if he was born, if he was a Pisces, the sun would be in Pisces. And then if the sun's in Pisces, for example, Mercury can never be far away from the sun. So it has to be in a sign in the sun sign or next to it. And Venus can only be 2 signs away. So you already get the Mercury and Venus limited to where they can be in the chart. And then you go from there and you can say, well, maybe Neptune was on his midheaven. Neptune is of course, they didn't know about Neptune then, but Neptune is the ruler of Pisces. And the midheaven of the chart is kind of like the goal of what the public, it could be the public view of a person, and it can be your job, your career, your work, what you'll be known for, your legacy. So maybe they would say, okay, hey, maybe Neptune is on the midheaven, and then you would look and see what time the Jesus would have been born to have that. I don't know. It gets it gets too technical. So I don't.
Yeah, wow. I didn't realize it was. I've never heard that book down, but some of it kind of sounds like where you paint the target and then you paint a circle around it or something.
Yeah. Well, they acknowledge that this is all speculation. They aren't trying to say they've determined. They're just like, it's like a fun kind of challenge to see if you can come up with it.
Well, and I think that's one of the points you brought up in one of your posts was just these man-centered views to approach meaning of things, like who ultimately gives meaning and understanding to things. It's God. And trying to ascribe meaning to things that God hasn't ascribed, you're really going to get confused. And where Scripture says, some trust in chariots, some trust in princes, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. And and I think that's where, in many ways, astrology goes wrong, because it can end up hurting people in so many ways, because you're basing these life off of these understandings that it's not really grounded in ultimate reality. Truth is that which corresponds to reality, and some would say as defined by God, the ultimate reality. I don't know if you want to say anything else on that.
But, no, I mean, I mean, of course, I agree with that. But I mean, an astrologer wouldn't see it that way, because reality to an astrologer and to a New Ager is, it's a whole other story as to what reality is. I could do 30 minutes on that.
But it's definitely not the correspondence view of truth. Now, well, let's move forward on. Let's talk about this. Will be a quick one. Now, a lot of people say, no, you need to say Christmas and not Xmas. What's the deal with that whole debate?
Yeah. This is an interesting thing. The X actually comes from the Greek letter, the first letter of Christos, Christ. And so X is actually standing for Christ. And I think it's, fell out of favor. And, a lot of people who started using it, people were thinking, well, they're just taking Christ, away. They're Xing him out. But actually it stands for Christ. And, so when I discovered that, I don't know when that was, a few years ago, I thought that was kind of cool. Now, I haven't used it. I haven't except on the post that I did on that, I said Merry Xmas because I was writing about it. But I haven't really done it yet, because I feel like people might take it the wrong way, and they might not understand. They might not know that. And they might think, what is she doing here? She's taking Christ out of Christmas.
Which
I'm not sure, unless a lot of Christians start using or everybody kind of knows what it is. Might be hard to use it, but it's good to know that anyway.
It's still referring to Christ anyway, so it's not really a big problem like people may think.
Christmas is kind of a long word. It makes it easier on Christmas cards or whatever.
If you get tired of typing out the whole word.
Definitely.
Let's talk about Saint Nick, and then we'll get to Christmas trees after that.
Christmas trees.
So
Saint Nicholas, yes.
The original Saint Nicholas, what can you tell us about him?
Yes, he's an early figure saint. He was a very solid believer from everything I've read and heard. Very solid, stood against heresies, stood for the truth of Scripture. And he was apparently a very kind-hearted person who gave to the poor. There are a lot of legends and myths about him. There's a whole bunch of them because he's a very popular figure. So I have heard a lot of things. I don't know how true they are. I've heard things about him, these stories of him giving money to a father who didn't have the dowry to wed his daughters. And if his daughters weren't married, they would be taken away to, a slave, as sex slaves, etc. And I don't know, it sounds more legendary to me, but he was a historical figure. And he really, it's well known that he did stand for the biblical truth and the gospel. I think it's a story about him. Isn't the story about, is he the one who supposedly punched somebody? That Athanasius?
It was Arius, and Saint Nick punched Arius for denying the Trinity or the deity.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was Saint Nick then who supposedly punched Arian. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the legend goes. I know. I was trying to pull up a picture. I found a couple pictures from the Greek Orthodox Church that has different depictions of Saint Nick punching Arius. Now there's debate if it was an Arian, someone who was a follower of Arius, or Arius himself. And of course, I've heard there's debate if he was actually at the Council of Nicaea or not. But the tradition is that he was so mad about Arius's teaching. I'm trying to find that. Okay. My computer.
I read a refutation of that sometime this year. It came up somewhere where I was reading it, and somebody posted about how that they posted like something factual that refuted it, but I can't remember the details of it. So I think it is kind of seen as a legend and not necessarily true. But anyway, he had the reputation of being a solid Christian and being kind-hearted and giving to the poor and giving to children. And so that kind of merged into this. Saint Nicholas became this figure associated with Christmas and gift giving. And there's so many legends and stories around how these things develop that it's very convoluted. I mean, you would have to spend hours and hours reading this stuff because these stories kind of merge and then they go away and then they reemerge somewhere else later, and then names change, and it just becomes really complicated. But that ended up with Saint Nicholas, and Santa, what we call Santa Claus, really is based on Saint Nicholas. And so people may think, well, wait a minute, Santa Claus, that doesn't sound like Saint Nicholas. Well, what happened is that Saint Nicholas was a very, very popular figure with the Dutch. They especially liked Saint Nicholas. It was a big hero to them. And in Dutch, they say St. Nicholas, Sinter, S-I-N-T-E-R, Nicolaas. And the last part of Nicolaas is C-L-A-A-S, okay, because it's a Dutch word. And so Sinter Nicholas became Santa Claus, Santa Claus. If you leave out the Nick part, Santa Claus, Santa Claus. So Dutch people in the United States and Santa Claus just was a word that evolved from Sinter Nicholas, because there's other stories about Santa Claus that are not true, trying to connect it to Satan and ridiculous stuff like that. I am so weary of people trying to make Christmas evil and trying to make Santa Claus evil. I mean, if you don't like Santa Claus, that's fine, but don't try to link him to Satan. He really is linked historically to St. Nicholas, and especially to the Dutch Sinter Nicolaas. So Sinter Nicolaas, Santa Claus, see, that's how it goes. And that happens with languages. That's real common for a word from one language that goes into another language to be abbreviated and come out, somewhat very differently. So that's the figure of Santa Claus. Of course, that's something that came later. It's not really connected directly to Jesus or to Christmas. It's a tradition that came later. And so there are Christian parents who don't like to use the Santa Claus figure because, first of all, he's not real. So if they tell their child Santa Claus is going to come bring presents and put them, under the tree, and knowing that's not true, they don't like to do that. So I've seen a lot of Christian parents say that. Now, when my son was young, I wasn't a Christian. So, I mean, his father and I did do the whole Santa Claus thing. And then he got to an age, and I can't remember how old he was. I think he was 7 when he realized Santa Claus wasn't real. But it didn't bother him. And it was the same thing for me. I remember when I realized Santa Claus wasn't real. And it didn't bother me at all. I wasn't like, gee, my parents lied to me, and
you didn't feel betrayed.
No, I didn't. I thought it was kind of sweet that they had given me this story of Santa Claus, and all the while they were the ones putting the presents under the tree. Yeah. And it did not bother me at all. And I had to keep it up for my sister who was younger, So, I don't know. So, but I think that's an individual choice for parents that they need to decide on their own whether or not to do that. So I'm not going to say whether it's right or wrong. And Caleb, I don't know what you and your wife do. Your children are pretty young.
Yeah, they're young.
Do you tell them about Santa Claus?
We tell them about the original Santa Claus. We were just watching some history about him. I think they know it's like a fun pretend.
Yeah. Yeah, some parents will do that. They'll tell them about it, but they'll say he's not real. It's just he's a fun character who kind of people pretend he's taking presents to children. and so they'll tell them about Santa Claus, but they won't try to make him real. So that's another option.
Something interesting some viewers might want to hear as far as our family is concerned is, so our son, who's just turned 1 August 16th, his name is Nikolai RC. Well, RC is named after RC Sproul. His middle name is Robert Charles.
Oh my goodness.
Our son, and his first name is Nikolai because we were missionaries in Ukraine, and Nikolai, we had a friend named Nikolai, and we loved the name. But also the actual historical St. Nicholas. And, St. Nicholas became the patron saint in the Orthodox Church in Russia. Well, we're not Orthodox like we Reformed Baptists in our views, but Protestant. But, Ukraine and Russia, that whole Slavic area, Nikolai is a very popular name because St. Nicholas was the patron saint over there. So that's part of our history, and so we like Saint Nick a lot here. Our son's named after him in part. So
that's interesting. Yeah. That's interesting. You can tell him that story as he gets older. He can understand that. Yeah.
Just tell him not to punch any heretics.
Yeah. Yeah. So Santa Claus is okay. I see him really kind of loosely connected to Christmas, but he's not an integral part of it. So, include him or not, that, but don't call him satanic.
Yeah. I know I was, as I was just going over research for this episode, I know that there was one point in church history with St. Francis of Assisi. He made a big deal of saying, okay, hey, we're kind of celebrating some of the legacy of Saint Nick around December, but then he was feeling like there was too much emphasis on him instead of on Christ, and so he started promoting like a nativity scene, and he felt like it was distracting, and they called it the Christ scene nativity. And one thing I came across I thought was Martin Luther and how he's connected with Christmas trees as well. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard that, and in one of my original Christmas posts, though, I had seen or read an article that the first Christmas trees were put up in Estonia, not Germany, but Estonia. Now I don't know, maybe Estonia was. I don't know if Estonia was part of Germany at the time, or I don't think so. But of course, it's very close. I mean, it's not real far away, but. I had read that it was first put up in Estonia or Latvia, which are right next to each other. And I read that before I read anything about Martin Luther. And then the Martin Luther thing, I've heard several people or seen several posts on Facebook about Martin Luther and the tree. And there's another story about the tree being chosen because it's it's a triangle, a pine.
Oh yeah,
pine tree, and that represents the Trinity. And then I read it was hung upside down. I can't remember why, but I read that, and the first Christmas trees were hung upside down. Now I don't know if that's true or not, but the whole tradition of the Christmas tree did start with Christians, whether it was Estonia, Latvia, or Martin Luther in Germany, or maybe it was all three of them. Maybe it happened on all three places, maybe one before the other. And it was something done by Christians. It wasn't done by pagans. And so a tree, we have to remember who made trees. I mean, God made trees. And in the post I did, I think it's the one today, which is the stones cry out, which is kind of my message on Christmas, that the whole world is celebrating. Pretty much worldwide, Christmas is celebrated. Even in non-Christian countries, even non-Christians will have Christmas. And I mean, like I did before I was a Christian. And even if at the time Christians aren't celebrating Christ, they're celebrating a season of joy. To me, it's that you cannot silence the news of Jesus Christ. You cannot silence. Even the world acknowledges it. Even the fallen world acknowledges it. And to me, that is a wonderful thing. I think that is great. And my post on the Jesus going into Jerusalem. Now, this is more connected to Easter than Christmas, but his disciples are starting to praise him and saying, behold, here comes the king, and praising God. And the Pharisees, of course, don't like this. And they say to Jesus, Master, rebuke your disciples. Basically tell them to shut up. And Jesus said, if they were silent, the stones would cry out. So the very stones on the street he's writing on the colt would cry out. And I think the message of that is that you cannot stop the praise of God. You cannot stop the news of Jesus. It's gone out into the world. The fact that there are these Christmas celebrations, you go into any city almost at Christmas time, and there's all, whether they have trees up or lights, or, shops have Christmas trees in the window. Maybe not so much this year with the with the pandemic, but normally that's what you see. And you see this worldwide acknowledgement of the birth of Christ, and you don't see anything like that for any other religion. There isn't anything that even comes close to that. That to me is a testimony to Christ and a testimony to God, and how no matter what people believe, the news is out there. The word is out there. The truth is out there, no matter what people believe. So that was my post today. And in that post, I had I don't remember if it was that post or another one, but there's a verse that someone on my Facebook page posted from Isaiah 60. And it's so beautiful. I wonder if I can find it real quick while I'm talking here. But it's such a cool thing. It's Isaiah 60. Let's see if I can find it, because I can't remember exactly where it is. But it's about it's where God is talking about his sanctuary. The whole chapter of Isaiah 60 is a beautiful chapter to read. And he talks about how he's going to be exalted. And he says, here it is. He says, the glory of Lebanon will come to you. He's talking about Jerusalem and the city and how Jerusalem will be exalted. The glory of Lebanon will come to you, the juniper, the elm tree, and the cedar together, to beautify the place of my sanctuary, and I will make the place of my feet glorious. And this is verse 13. So I thought it's interesting because he mentions trees there being in his sanctuary and how they will make his sanctuary glorious. So I thought that was really cool. That person posted it in her comment, and then I used it in my post. I didn't know about that verse, or, I just never, I know I've read Isaiah 60, but of course I wasn't thinking about Christmas.
Yeah. Well, there's so many scriptures that overlap.
So, I think that's kind of a cool verse.
Yeah. While we're looking at Isaiah, of course, there's another verse people point to in Isaiah to say that, but the practice of something connected with a tree is too connected to pagan idolatry and worship, and so to false gods. I think it's Isaiah 44 or Jeremiah 10 is what I've heard.
Jeremiah 10.
Yeah.
40,
I've heard there's Isaiah 44 is one that people bring up as well.
Oh, really?
Jeremiah 10:4, it says, and they decorate it with silver and gold and fasten it with a hammer and nails so that it cannot move. You're talking about trees there and idol worship. Mm-hmm. That was one of the big verses the witnesses would use. Oh no, you can't do a tree because you're worshiping it. And but then it goes into intent. Are you intentionally worshiping the tree, or are you not? I mean, it's it's just, again, it's rabbit holes you can go down.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Jeremiah 10 is not about decorating a tree. It's about cutting a tree up,
right,
and carving the wood into idols.
Yes.
And you decorate them because they're
not, witnesses aren't known for context.
Yeah.
I suggest.
Apparently some Christians aren't either, because a lot of Christians come at me with that Jeremiah 10. They post it. Sometimes I'll post the whole thing on my Facebook page in their comment. And, I say, have you, or they'll just say Jeremiah 10, see Jeremiah 10. And I'll say, have you really read it? I think that you should really go back and read it carefully, because if you do, you'll see it's talking about cutting the wood up to make idols. And I see in Isaiah 44, and there's several places where God talks about using wood to make idols and how.
Yeah, that's the same thing in Isaiah 44,
Yeah,
15. It's just making idols, though, is the difference.
It's the same thing as Jeremiah 10. He will cut cedars for himself. He takes an oak or another oak and lets it grow strong for himself. He plants a laurel tree. And then it goes on in how they'd use some of the wood to make a fire to warm themselves by, and they use some for an idol. And God says, so, isn't it occurring to you that the wood you're using to warm yourself is the same thing as the God that you're worshiping?
Yeah. It's kind of mocking these useless idols.
Yeah, kind of like think about it, I mean, it's the same thing here. There's no difference. So, that's the point of that passage in Isaiah 44 and in Jeremiah. Jeremiah 10 is very much a sort of satirical comment from God on how they're making idols out of just wood. And who made trees and who made wood? God. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they're worshiping the wood and not the God who made the tree. I think that's the message there of Jeremiah 10. So again, has nothing to do with Christmas trees. And of course, Christmas trees didn't exist in the time of Jeremiah anyway.
Right.
Yeah, it's anachronistic historically anyway. Yeah. So that's a great point. And I don't know of anyone who's actually worshiping a tree, any Christian who's saying, I'm going to worship it. Like, I just think it's beautiful to have that. Now people say, but the fact is that you have something that, of course, falsely claiming that it's connected with pagan ritual. It's not. And, I've heard Luther attribute it. The story goes that he saw the stars through the tree, and he was reminded of God coming down to man from the heavens. And I like that imagery. You could Google some picture that has like a drawing of Luther and his family. Now, I think they had candles in the Christmas tree, which is some very safe. No. That's a great recipe for a disaster in my household. It would be, at least.
Yeah, and that would be like the stars that he saw through the trees, right? So
I think that was
that, and then and then you put the lights on the trees. Yeah, so that's actually a very beautiful image. I like that. That's very poetic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's why it resonated with me. That one. Now, I mean, we kind of hit on this. Okay, so your intention and your motivation when it comes to a tree, there's probably a rare exception of maybe some pagans who worshipped it. And I've heard of a story, I think it was in Germany, where maybe some pagans were worshiping like an oak tree with Odin.
Druidry.
Odin or something, or Thorin.
Well, Druidry is actually a Celtic religion that does where trees are a big focus on Druidry. And so there is a belief in trees and gods in trees and power in trees. And that goes with the Druids. And then there has been, along with the revival of a lot of paganism, which we call Neo-paganism, today there's a revival of Druidry. So there are contemporary people today who claim to follow Druidry. Now, whether they are actually out there worshiping the trees, I don't know, but they do give special meaning to trees. And special, powers to it. And so it is, the oak, I think traditionally was the oak tree that was honored. But again, that has nothing to do with a Christmas tree. Like you said, I don't know any Christians or really even non-Christians who are worshiping their Christmas tree. I mean, when we put up a Christmas tree before I was a Christian, it was just a decoration, and it was a sign that it was Christmas and it was fun to decorate. That was it. That was like, it's fun let's get some fun decorations and let's have fun decorating the tree. It was like a fun thing to do. And not being a Christian, I didn't really think about Christ in the context of it, but I wasn't worshiping it. I mean, this is a decoration project, it was like interior decorating.
Yeah.
It's not worship in any sense of the form. And my friends, I had a lot of pagan clients as an astrologer who were Wiccans and witches and into neo-paganism, and they didn't worship trees either. I mean, none of them worship trees. I only knew a very few Druids, but and whether they were worshiping but if they were worshiping a tree, it wasn't a Christmas tree, because Actually, on a program I saw recently online, it was Doreen Virtue had a program and said that some pagans don't want a Christmas tree because it's too Christian.
No, yeah, I've
Some
heard that
pagans
too.
are like and like it's a point of dispute as to whether or not to have a Christmas tree because that's too Christian. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, and I think many Christians' concern though is if it feels secularized, like without any acknowledgement or indifference to the centrality of Christ. I think that is a lot of Christians' concern, or the consumerism with it. Because if we could go on during this season and not become more Christ-like in our attitude and more worshipful, I think that is some of the pushback as far as the secular aspect. Now, I think kind of closing, I think there's a point you talk about a lot, and I have your book on that. Of course, Richard Rohr and the Enneagram, and we'll just hit on it a little bit here. Because I've heard a lot of people say, well, intent precedes content. And we've kind of applied that as far as it goes with the tree. Like, your intent is not to worship it. And that's more important than the tree itself. I mean, and the tree is neutral. But I think maybe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe that kind of breaks down when you have things when it comes to, say, the Enneagram, because people say, I know you've hit on this before on the Cultist show. Well, if you're celebrating Christmas, well, you've already said that's not pagan, but they say Christmas is pagan. Why can't you use these tools that have occultic origins, the Enneagram? How would you answer that briefly?
Right. Yeah, that's a lot of people, and I got a lot of comments on that on my Enneagram posts. Well, you better stop observing Christmas then if you're telling me to stop using Enneagram. I got a lot of that. Of course, first of all, that's a category mistake. Using a tool and observing a day, a holiday, whatever it may be, are two completely different things. It's not the same thing. You know, that's like comparing using a Ouija board to celebrate Christmas or something. I mean, it's not
right.
The use of a tool is you are actively participating in getting some kind of knowledge or answer from that tool. That's what you're doing. In a holiday is usually celebrating something or acknowledging the existence of something. So they're not exactly the same category to begin with. And secondly, of course, Christmas isn't pagan. Mm-hmm. But even if like I said in the beginning, if it had pagan origins, a day is neutral. A tree is neutral. A tree is created by God. So how you're observing it is what matters. And if you are observing it, as a way to celebrate Christ or thank God for Christ, etc., then that's a Christian thing to do. There's nothing unbiblical about it. Whereas the Enneagram is not neutral. It's not a neutral tool. The claims for it are false. The claims for it being a personality assessment are false. It's not. The claims for what it teaches in all of the Enneagram books are false, and some of it is heretical. So you have a tool that came from men who did spirit contact, and where the types actually come directly through automatic writing, of a form of spirit contact. And so you are using information that's based on content from spirits and men who contacted spirits, and a heretic, Richard Rohr, and his disciples,
who's really promoted it and made it
big.
Rohr.
Yeah, and because the first two books in the church on the Enneagram were written by disciples of Richard Rohr. So it's not neutral, basically, is the bottom line. So that's another reason it's not the same thing to celebrate Christmas as it is to use the Enneagram. That they don't compare. The analogy falls apart when you know the facts and you look at the information there.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful because I know in your cultish episode, you broke this down in a lot of depth in your part 2. And I think there is a great point that if people say, Well, this is different Christmas trees, but when we talk about Enneagram or other occultic practices, the intent before content point breaks down in the, well, we can't say, well, I have good motivations. I'm going to try to use Ouija boards for Jesus, or that doesn't work. So that kind of breaks down. It's like, well, I have good motivations I'm going to go into prostitution to get people out of prostitution. We're like, that's not how this works.
Right.
And I think I feel like that's a really helpful distinction. Like, because if people aren't thinking clearly about Christmas, then they start being inconsistent in their thinking. Like for example, like yoga is inherently a Hindu worship ritual, right?
It's a spiritual practice.
Right. So if it's inherently, then I mean, stretches, that's different. Stretching is neutral, but when you have something that's inherently about worshiping and yoking yourself to pagan deities, then I think it breaks down. I don't know if you would add anything to that or correct it or not.
I agree with you. I think yoga is a good example of that. That it is a Hindu spiritual practice, and even in the New Age, it's a spiritual practice. Even the New Age take on it, which includes some Hindu elements, but can also be more New Age than Hindu. It's still a spiritual practice. The positions, the asanas, are many of them imitate the positions of various Hindu gods. And so at the very least, they're sort of honoring the Hindu god. Probably goes back to, because nobody really knows, the history of yoga is very convoluted too. And it wasn't done, though, for exercise or for relaxation or for becoming more limber. It always had a spiritual purpose. So that's why I say in yoga that you can't divorce the spiritual dimension of it from the exercise. And also, I also say, if you want exercise, there are other ways to get exercise. Mm-hmm. If that's your goal, or if your goal is to be more flexible or more limber, there are so many other ways, so many other things you can do besides yoga. So that's another reason not to do it. But yeah, it's very, I did some yoga as a New Ager, and everybody in the New Age knows it's spiritual. That's just an accepted thing. It's just kind of like, of course. And so when you see Christians as a New Ager, when you see Christians doing it, it's very confusing to New Agers, because they're either thinking, well, it must be okay if you're a Christian to do things from other religions, to do spiritual things from other religions, or they're thinking, are those people really Christians? Because why are they doing yoga? It's very confusing to New Agers, actually, I think, to see Christians doing yoga. That's another reason I give for not doing it, because I think it's a misleading to unbelievers, and it's a bad witness to Christ. So anyway, so I'm getting into yoga too much here.
Yeah, no. Well, and I just wanted to make the distinction, because people get confused between Christmas, bad thinking on that, and then inconsistent when it comes to things that are pagan practices.
If you assume Christmas is pagan, then you start getting sloppy thinking on other areas. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's so important. Christians should want the truth. They should want the facts of things. That's what we are supposedly witnesses for Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. And if we're going to proclaim a Savior who is the truth, and we're saying we want to give truth to people, then we should want truth ourselves in all areas. Mm-hmm. In all areas, we should want the facts. And that's one of my biggest things now. One of my biggest messages to Christians is, don't you want the facts on this? Even if you don't like it, the facts are the facts. So, that's another one of my endeavors in my ministry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Out there.
Absolutely. Danny, I don't know if you want to, we'll kind of wrap up here, but if you wanted to add anything and some closing thoughts.
My main thought was just what she was just saying is, I was raised in deception for over 40 years. And one of my main goals was, once I became a Christian in 2014, was to not be deceived, not be fooled again, and like the old Who song. And that's really been a big thing for me, is, coming out of a martial arts background, especially where yoga was, just kind of always accepted as, just something you did. And then I never really got into it my theory is stretching is just, if you want to stretch, touch your toes, and leave everything else out of it. But there's just so much deception out there, and so much misinformation.
Yeah.
That you've really got to be vigilant and really look and really dig to find what the truth about these things are. And it's like you said, you may find an answer you don't like, but but that doesn't mean the answer's wrong. And that's one of the things I think a lot of believers do in a lot of different areas is they'll see a plain biblical answer for a certain thing, but they're like, oh, and that's where even Christians can have that cognitive dissonance where they're like, oh, no, this doesn't compute. This doesn't compute. I don't like this. I can't buy into this. But the truth doesn't lie, and we're called to follow Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life, and He is the truth. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we just have to realize that that's going to mean that we got our bubble's going to get burst.
Yeah.
And we need to really learn to be humble and follow Jesus, and no matter where it takes us.
Yeah, amen. Well, it's so good to have both of you on the show with us today. And I think in closing, these two verses come to mind of 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether you eat or drink, do it all to the glory of God. And I think we can celebrate to the glory of God, and that's the key part. In Romans 12 says, offer your body as living sacrifices to the Lord, and don't offer your bodies as, to any other pagan deity. That there is no other God. There's only one God. So really, I think those are probably offering yourself up to demons and interacting with them. So offer your entire life, your body, soul, spirit, all of it to the Lord, and to honor Him and glorify Him. And I think celebrating Christmas is a great opportunity to remember the incarnation of our Lord, that the eternal God took on flesh, dwelt with men, He tabernacled among men, and he came to serve and to give His life as a ransom for many, and died on our behalf and rose from the grave 3 days later. And He is reigning now, the King of Kings, victorious. And we urge you to place your faith in this King, the Prince of Peace, the Lord of Glory. And so I want to thank you guys for listening today to this episode of the Engaged Truth Show. Please like and subscribe on our Engaged Truth YouTube channel. You can also check us out on the podcast on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple podcasts as well. It'll be up in about a week or two. And I hope you guys will share this with as many people as possible, so more people